I hope I'm not the only public attendee.
We'll
Don't
see
worry.
who shows up.
There.
You will have our undivided attention.
That's like office hours.
Yeah. There's someone else. We'll just give people another few minutes to come in. Hey, Micah.
Yeah.
We will be we're planning to give a similar presentation at next week's event. Maybe, but we're trying to figure out where we might shorten it.
Okay.
So if once you see us run through it today, if you have any suggestions on where to cut, where to emphasize, any guidance.
Yeah. I'll view it through that lens.
Yeah. All right. Why don't we get started? We have a bunch of people in. Corinne, before we start, why don't we do just a round of introductions from the BPS staff that are here and will be presenting. Everyone, I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner here at BPS. I use he, him pronouns. I lead the housing and economic policy team here at BPS, and we are the leads on putting together the economic opportunity analysis, or the EOA. Corinne?
Yep. Corinne Sacedo. I am an economic planner here at BPS. So my focus is obviously on the economic development side of this study. Jeff?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Jeff Cottle. I use he, him pronouns, and I manage the River Environmental team. So our team, and Daniel specifically is the project manager, and he'll introduce himself, but we are managing the Columbia Corridor Industrial Lands Environmental Code project, which is the environmental portion of these two projects so that the CCILD Columbia Corridor project will inform the EOA. So Daniel, you're last. And I won't be presenting today, but I'm here and will answer questions as needed. So Daniel.
Thank you, Jeff. I am an environmental planner on the River and Environmental team, and I'm working on the Columbia Corridor and Industrial Lands E-Zone project. Thank you.
Great. And lurking in the background is Wayne Grabowski, helping us with all things tech in running the Zoom platform this afternoon. All right, Corinne, you want to get us started with the we have presentation. There we go, looking good. Why don't you move to the next slide? What we're going to do is give you an overview of the EOA, what it's about. And then we're going to focus on some key industrial area policy decisions that we are trying to coordinate and incorporate into the EOA. And then finally, and we'll give you some details on each of those sort of policy areas. And then we'll end with an overview of what we are calling the scenarios, or how we might mix and match the different policy decisions to look at what that outcome is in terms of meeting those other policy outcomes and what it means for the EOA. And then after that, we should have some time for your questions and answers this afternoon. Next slide, please. All right, just why don't I hand this over to Corinne, and he'll give an overview of where we're at, and we'll go from there.
Hey, everybody. We are at the stage of this process, the EOA adoption process. We're in a discussion draft, so we've pulled together a lot of our projections, our ideas of where the city could perhaps look at some strategies, and as Tom mentioned, the scenarios we'll go over. And we're really in an outreach process right now of just hearing people's thoughts, people's comments, questions, and that gets refined. The discussion draft gets refined into a proposed draft, and that is what gets proposed to Planning Commission. That'll happen before the end of the year. So we have kind of a window here we really would love to hear your feedback. And then after Planning Commission, in probably early to mid 26, this will go to City Council. So there should be opportunities for input at each one of those stages, but just to give you a heads up of where we're at now. So this study is called an economic opportunities analysis. If you haven't been tracking this too closely or reading it, the basics here are: this is a state requirement. It's called a Goal 9 requirement from the states. Goes back to a Senate bill from the 1973 that ties to a lot of land use requirements for the whole state, or for all the cities in the state. So this is a requirement that every city has to do about every 5 to 7 years. And it submits it to the state. The state says, okay, thank you. This also becomes part of our comprehensive plan. So some of the ideas or the concepts get adopted as part of that. And then it also helps to guide some policy decisions. So it is not changing major sort of zoning of certain places directly with the EOA. There will be some follow-up actions that might happen as part of other efforts, but this specific economic opportunities analysis is not changing a commercial business district to an industrial area, anything like that. This is kind of a lot of looking at how much land is available, and then how do we address it if we don't have enough land for the employment needs. So let's start with what the actual projections are in terms of job growth. This comes from the state, the same entity that helps review these, the Oregon Employment Department at the state. We use some of their data that they do projections for different regions around the state. What we do is sort of look at what the city's percentage of those jobs would be for our region. So right now it's around 46% of our region is actually city of Portland. We look back at the last business cycle. So that dashed line is actually what we saw in the previous business cycle. So kind of going up to around 2019. And needless to say, it was robust growth. It was about 1.5% employment growth per year. And that green and orange and blue lines are what we were contemplating using different methodology for the next 20 years. And we landed on that middle line, that orange line, that is kind of more connected with what the state is expecting. And that is around 0.7% per year. So, around half of historic growth. And to be honest, that's a little bit faster than what we've been seeing the last couple of years. So some people might consider that conservative. Some people might consider that aggressive. We think it's somewhere in the middle. And we do break that out by geographic area. So the way we think about the city, or the way we are taking some of those numbers and trying to make it into land and land supply, is we break it out actually into 5 different areas. So that's central city, you see there in blue. Commercial areas, so that's your business districts, gateway, all those kinds of areas that you would imagine that businesses are located. The gray there is industrial. I think you can get a good idea of what industrial land looks like, whether it's Columbia Corridor or on the harbor. And then that sort of lighter pink is institutional. So that means campuses and the hospitals. That's mostly what makes up institutional. The 5th area, which is, I won't say all of the white here, but a lot of it is residential. So there is, as you'll see, a fair amount of employment that happens in residential areas and will continue to grow in residential areas. This is what our projections show for the next 20 years, broken out into those geographic areas. So at the bottom there, the actual number of jobs, if you remember from the previous slide or 2 slides ago, it's about 90,000 is our total job projection for the next 20 years. About 1/3 of that is industrial jobs. About 1/4 will be in central city. About 1 in 5 is neighborhood commercial. A smaller percentage, and part of that is just because the areas are pretty tight where we consider the institutional areas, is going to be on sort of campus or institutional jobs, and then the residential areas would be about 20%. So when you're thinking about these jobs, I think you could all imagine central city is a lot of professional services. Neighborhood commercial could be a lot of that retail. Industrial, obviously, the warehousing, transportation, manufacturing. Campus could be the academic, the nursing. Residential areas are both people who work out of their homes, but there's a lot of senior housing, a lot of schools that are in residential areas. So when you see that number, that's not just we're expecting a ton of people to start working out of their homes. That is also some of those entities that are around us now that we don't always consider to be in residential areas. So what we did was looked at how much land we have, or again, we're trying to take these points by business cycles. So it's technically 2019, and we're looking out 20 years and saying how much land do we currently have? And then those numbers, those employment numbers, how much land per employee would they traditionally require? And so obviously if you're in an office job, that's, what we've seen historically is that's, like, one person for every 300 square feet or something. Whereas industrial jobs, oftentimes, they are on much larger plots of area. So that's why there was a slightly more number of jobs projected, but the reason why this looks very large when it comes to the industrial land is simply because industrial jobs typically have more acreage or more square footage per employee. And then what this chart actually indicates is that we appear to have enough land supply to meet the demand that we have projected out for 20 years. It is getting tighter in some of these areas, particularly industrial areas. I think it's challenging because we are trying to come up with developable land, and that term can get tricky when there are sites that require remediation, that require infrastructure. And so we'll get into that a little bit more, but this is generally the big takeaway that the state requires is do you have enough land for what we would consider to be your employment growth? And the short answer is yes. But we would love to see our employment growth to be even higher than that baseline. So we are looking at ways at activating certain parts of the city in different ways to really support accessible, family sustaining wages throughout the city. So for Central City, what we're sort of presenting as potential strategies here for kind of future actions would be putting more funding into some of that infrastructure to unlock some of those sites that you might drive by and not see much action happening in those industrial areas. Remediation, obviously, brownfield means sort of a former industrial or some of the land might require some environmental remediation to make it viable again. So can we find more funding? Can we partner with the state? Permitting. Can we allow for permitting both for different elements at the same time? Right now, that can a little bit of a challenge. We'll get into that more in a minute. And then downtown, we are exploring, hey, we not only have some capacity for new development, but really what we need to think about are the existing office buildings, and are there ways of unlocking basically activating more of those spaces, getting folks who might not see the same return of office jobs. So can we create some flexibility, whether that's around zoning and maybe allowing some productive uses or different kind of first floor uses? How can we really partner with those folks who want to either on a short term or long term occupy what is a growing sort of empty market or a chunk of emptiness downtown that we would love to work with the market to fill. And then with residential areas, we're exploring whether there needs to be any modernization of our permitting for home businesses. If you're particularly trying to expand or really have employees in your home, what does that mean? I think what we're hearing is still a demand for some help with folks who are running like childcare in their homes or their garages. How can we make that function a little better? Neighborhood commercial areas, we'd love to continue the efforts around perhaps making it when there is a use change. So if you are going from a shoe store to a restaurant, how can we make that process a little easier when it comes to not burdening too many small businesses with large costs? And then perhaps allowing for kind of hybrid uses. So if you want to roast your coffee beans and have a coffee shop, how can we allow more of that by right? And then continue to work with institutional campuses and whatnot to allow them to densify. And then what we're seeing a little more of a trend is outpatient and seeing some of those institutions start to blend in with their surrounding communities, which we'd love to support as well. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few of these ideas around promoting, activating some of these industrial areas, and then I'll pass it to Daniel to talk about some of the environmental resources that are being considered as part of this as well. So this is a quick breakdown of the jobs and where specifically industrial jobs, and where they would sort of be located generally in these different sort of sub areas of our industrial parts of the city. I think what our goal is we've heard from people that some types of industrial actions are getting pushed into different parts of the city, and we'd love to, I think, make sure that there's plenty of land in our industrial areas to keep servicing some of those types of actions, whether it's warehousing or transportation or whatnot. So we are exploring different kinds of investments that I mentioned before. So here's 6 that we came up with based on some additional studies that are going on right now. So like I mentioned before, some permitting assistance. So if someone's looking at grading and demolition at the same time, can that be considered at the same time, as opposed to first getting your demolition permit and then getting your grading permit and then getting your land? So how can we make it just sort of a more fluid process? How can we allow developers to do some of the public infrastructure themselves, as long as it's meeting everything the city is requiring, as opposed to having the city do that for them? How can we maybe start to look at the parts of the city that if we were to invest in some infrastructure might unlock some more of those sites? And then even exploring whether you could do an SDC deferral. So instead of paying earlier in the process, you would pay a little bit later in that permitting process, and that could save folks money that would otherwise be kind of held while the other permitting is going on. And then looking at, again, cleaning up some of that land, remediation. Can we partner with the state? Can we partner with federal actors to get more money to clean up some of these sites? And perhaps can we unlock more transportation of goods, some of that freight that seems to be bottlenecks around, and getting those transportation users kind of on the interstates or those other major highways that we want to get them on easier, as opposed to having them navigate other parts of the city. All right, I'm going to pass this to Daniel to talk more about some of the considerations we're having at the same time around environmental resources. So Daniel, feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Corinne. And natural resource protections are incredibly important, and for the sake of complying with state, federal regulations, and for the intrinsic value that those resources provide. So it's important that we do natural resource protection, but as far as the economic opportunity analysis is concerned, protections of natural resources are looked at as a constraint. And so we want to make sure that as we are applying natural resource protections, we're doing it with an eye to how those protections could impact industrial lands and in development in general, the economy of Portland. So next slide, please. And so we're looking through the EOA at several different natural resource protection policy decisions. So one of those pertains to environmental overlay zones, particularly environmental overlays in the Columbia Corridor and some other areas that are adjacent to the Columbia Corridor, looking at natural resource protections in the North Reach of the Willamette River, and looking at updates to the tree code that would protect trees in industrial areas. And I'll talk more about each of those specific policy buckets as we move forward, or policy projects that could apply natural resource protections in these specific categories. So the first one is the Columbia Corridor and Industrial Lands Environmental Overlay Zone project. You can see the project area highlighted on this map here. It encompasses the Columbia Corridor and some other dispersed industrial areas around the city, and then some residential areas that are adjacent to those industrial areas. And what we're looking at doing in this project is making updates to the mapping of the protection overlay zone, which is applied to the most important natural resources, and the conservation zone, which is applied also to important natural resources, but where we expect some amount of development to occur. We're looking at 3 different scenarios in this project, and the outcome of what policy decisions we propose will inform and be important is in terms of the planning process for the economic opportunity analysis. Next slide, please. And so we have 3 different scenarios that we're looking at in this project. There's a low scenario that we've termed the minimum compliance scenario. This would, all 3 of these scenarios would entail some increase in environmental overlay coverage compared to the existing E-zones. The low scenario would provide kind of the minimum amount of natural resource protection that we think would still be meeting state and regional natural resource protection requirements. It applies conservation zone buffers to most features, up to all features, and it applies protection zone within the bounds of the water bodies and wetlands. But there are no protection zone buffers extending beyond the edge of those features. So in some cases, development could occur right up at the edge of some water features and wetlands. The climate resilient scenario has larger buffers. The conservation zone extends further, and there are protection zone buffers that extend beyond the banks of these features, beyond the edge of the wetland, and beyond the edge of the streams and the sloughs, meaning that there would be mandatory setbacks for most private development, more so than you get in the minimum compliance scenario. And then the maximum protection scenario, you'd apply even more protection overlay zone to try to get development setback even further. In all 3 of these scenarios, that would entail more E-zone coverage than the existing E-zones. There would be a shift from currently a lot of conservation zone is applied in the industrial areas. We'd be getting more protection zone in any of these scenarios than we currently have with the existing E-zones. So this slide is a comparison of the different scenarios that we have. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the existing E-zones. That's what's applied today. And then as you move clockwise, you get the low scenario, which would, you can see, would increase the E-zones compared to the existing E-zones. But a lot of the addition would be conservation zone beyond what we currently have. And then moving down, I guess it's not clockwise, so the bottom left-hand corner is the medium scenario. In that scenario, you can see that there's more protection zone relative to that low scenario, and the overall area covered by the E-zones would increase. And then in the high scenario, in the bottom right-hand corner, you have quite a bit more protection zone than you have in the other scenarios. So we're looking at what the impacts of these different scenarios would be on the EOA, on the amount of industrial land that we have available for additional development, but also keeping an eye towards what impacts potentially would be on an existing industrial land, because a lot of the job growth we're expecting in the industrial sector would come from redevelopment or intensification within sites that are already developed. So we want to understand how these different scenarios would potentially impact industrial development or intensification on sites as well. So those were the E-zone policies that we're looking at. We're also looking at the north reach of the Willamette River. It's important to note that Columbia Corridor project is being planned concurrently to be adopted, hopefully at the same time as the economic opportunity analysis. These other policies are things that could come later, but they're things that we're trying to account for as we're doing this EOA planning to make sure that we still have adequate capacity for the economic development that we're projecting. So the first of these other projects that we're looking at that we're expecting to follow along soon after the EOA is the north reach of the Willamette River. We have updated natural resource protection policies in the south reach and the central reach of the Willamette already, but the north reach, the policies are largely outdated. And the north reach is roughly extending from north of the central city to the confluence of the Willamette River and the Columbia River at the northern edge of the city. And so we're looking at some different scenarios, similar to with the CCIL project. We're looking at a 25-foot setback or a 50-foot setback from the Columbia River. Next slide shows the southern end of the project area for the north reach of the Willamette. And then in addition to the setbacks that would be imposed by these projects, we're also applying natural resource protections to portions of the floodplain that are adjacent to the river and to other significant natural resources that are in close proximity to the Columbia or to the Willamette River. Next slide, please. And then these slides focus in specifically on a couple of larger sites that are in the north reach of the Willamette. You got Terminal 2 on the left, and then I believe that's the Time Oil site on the right there. So you can see on these slides how those 25 and 50-foot setbacks from the edge of the river would look. And then you can also see that the where there's map floodplain or other map natural resources, the River E, river environmental overlay would extend a little bit further. But what's important to know here is that not only are we protecting natural resources, but we're also creating a level of surety for property owners. The regulations would be much more clearly delineated than the current Greenway overlay zone that applies in this area. And so if you are doing non-river dependent development and you're outside of that River E, there would be no additional regulations that would be imposed by the River E, whereas currently with the Greenway overlay, a lot of development, even outside of the immediate setback from the river, does trigger discretionary review, making it more difficult and making outcomes less certain for property owners. So this would allow some higher assurance that property owners can get development approved by making the change that we're proposing with this North Reach. And again, this project will be following soon on after the completion of the EOA.
Hey, Daniel, let me just make one note. So you might
Sure.
notice, and if you were looking at those maps, there's a lot of similarity in terms of you don't see a lot of difference in the orange and the green, and that's largely because in the North Reach, the river environmental will generally on most sites be very focused on the riverbank. And so that means this. So in these two examples, you see that green area that is, beyond the two different setback scenarios. They're the same in both of those scenarios because that's what we call the riparian buffer area, which is one of those floodplain requirements. It's basically 170 feet from ordinary high water. We have to apply additional requirements and additional mitigation there. And so that's why when you look at the comparison of those maps, there's not a lot of change because most of that environmental zoning is a result of the proposed environmental zoning in the two scenarios is largely is a result of those new floodplain requirements.
And then the last environmental policy that we're looking at is tree code standards in the heavy industrial zone, the IH zone. So we have Title 11 is the tree code that applies to tree protection, preservation, and replanting requirements that applies throughout the city of Portland. Previously, we had exemptions for many of our industrial zones. Some of those exemptions have gone away, and so now the only industrial zone that's still exempt from the tree code is the heavy industrial zone. And so we're looking at what it would look like to take away that exemption and to have some tree protection and preservation policies that would apply in the industrial areas. And again, we're looking at a few different scenarios. The low would pretty much maintain the status quo more or less. It would only have tree protections within the river environmental overlays. There would be some planting requirements that would be triggered by development, but there would be no requirement to preserve trees in the heavy industrial zone. Then the medium scenario would have some preservation requirements, and then the high scenario would have even more preservation requirements. All three of these scenarios require some level of planting, but the protections get more and more significant, especially for larger trees as you go through these the other scenarios. And you can see in the slide, most of the trees that are mapped in the heavy industrial zone are really in the E zones, but there are a significant number of trees that are not an area that's currently in the E zone or proposed to be in an E zone in the future. And the reason that we're considering tree protections as part of this policy is because City Council has adopted the new urban forest plan And that plan sets canopy targets to increase the amount of tree coverage in industrial areas. So to be consistent with the directives that the city council has given to us in terms of increasing tree canopy coverage, the tree protection scenarios would help to help the city to meet those goals that are in the urban forest plan. And that does it, I think, for the natural resource policies. I'll give it back to Corinne to finish up.
Yeah, I'll pick up. So the last set of policies have to do with community impacts. And that we're really looking at that edge or interface where industrial zoning backs up and is adjacent to residential zoning, and sort of what is going on, and are there measures that we could take to have a better set of development standards for industrial development that's in close proximity to residential areas. Next slide. Again, we've got lots of edges in Portland, up to 68 miles of edges in Portland, where our industrial areas are backing up to and adjacent to residential areas. Next slide, please. Here's another map just showing that, and what we have set up as part of the EOA, really two alternatives, and that is to look at a 500-foot buffer along these edges, and come up with, in a future project, come up with additional development standards. This could be wider landscape buffers, this could be building orientation, restrictions on where loading docks and driveways and access ways could be located on a site. And so for the low scenario, we have those added development standards and restrictions applying to large sites greater than 5 acres that have larger, more impactful development. And then in the high scenario, we have it applying to all industrial development in that 500-foot buffer. Next slide, please. So a little bit about scenarios. So we've got a lot of different options over 3 different policy areas. And so we are looking at what is the interaction if as you pick a different level scenario in these policy options, what does that mean, or how does that impact our buildable land inventory? Next slide, please. So what we've done is run a lot of different combinations of these, depending on the level of emphasis, in terms of which of these options for the different policy areas we have. And so, something like combination number 1, we just sort of what would happen if we picked the low option for all of these policy areas. And then we vary those combinations depending on what you want to emphasize. Next slide, please. And this is just another graphic portrayal of the sort of high, medium, low combinations that you can get into. And then along the bottom is the impact it has on the industrial land capacity. And I think the important takeaway from this analysis so far is under all of these scenarios, we have sufficient capacity to meet our future industrial land demand under the baseline employment forecast. And so that really gives us the flexibility to explore, these different combinations of these policy outcomes. Next slide, please. And so this is an example of, how we can begin to think about this and really have a discussion about where we should be emphasizing what we think is feasible, what could we strive for So on the left side here, we have what we've called a passive scenario. It recognizes that we may not have a lot of resources to put towards this in terms of investment. And so maybe we have a lighter touch, lighter regulatory touch when it comes to natural resource protection or community impacts. Go all the way over to the right is a more aggressive scenario, a we can do it all, and that we go for, you know, very high protection measures for natural resources and community livability, and that we sort of commit to finding the investment, committing staff and resources to some of the investment pieces that Corinne was talking about, such as brownfield remediation or freight infrastructure investments. And then in the middle, we have sort of something in the middle, different variations. One, you know, the more, I would say, the more protective scenario is something like if we leaned into the protection measures for natural resources and community, but recognize our current limited in resources to make further investments to support the economic development. What does that look like versus going the other way, a more growth-oriented scenario, which says, again, we're going to take a lighter regulatory touch and we're going to devote more resources to support economic development and growth. And so it begins to give you sort of that range, that bracket of what might be possible with the different combinations of policy options. Next slide, please. So I think just to wrap up here and get to your questions, you know, some key takeaways are that, you know, we have experienced robust economic growth. But Portland is lagging in the post-pandemic recovery. That you know, we are expecting slower economic growth. I think that is true not only for the city of Portland, but for the region, for the state, for the nation, as population growth slows down. And that shows up in forecasts at all of these different geography levels. I think as Corinne touched on with the implementation strategies, you know, we are gonna, different employment areas, different types of businesses are gonna require different kinds of support to realize that economic opportunity. And we also want to emphasize access to family sustaining, self-sufficient middle wage jobs, and looking for how can we achieve that through our industrial sector, through our healthcare sector, supporting small business growth. What are those different opportunities that we can really focus on these middle wage jobs? You know, we acknowledge that the industrial land supply is tight and getting tighter, and that shows up in these numbers. But we still have room to grow, and you know, we can still add another 20 to 30,000 jobs in our industrial area to support those middle wage job objectives. And then you know, just noting that the environmental decisions really cut both ways. It's not all expansion of those protection measures. You know, there are the E-zone adjustments in the along the Columbia Slough have different impacts on different properties. That this really is a correction, a reconciliation based on new, better information than what we've had in the past. And in some cases, that line moves back because there are no resources there, and in another case, it does expand. I think the same is true in the North Reach. where right now we have a very expansive greenway overlay zone that covers a lot of areas that do not have natural resources on them, and that the river environmental zone really focuses on the most important resources along the North Reach. Next slide, please. Again, for more information, here are the links to our website. That QR code will take you to the website. We have an online comment form through our Map app platform to take your written public comments through November 10th. We have an open house next week on Thursday in the Portland building. And so we'll have staff on hand and can talk more about this information with some display boards. This is all to say that, you know, as Corinne mentioned at the beginning, after November 10th, we'll be considering all of your comments and begin to put together a proposed draft that we will publish in early December, and that we will start the Planning Commission process in December, and there'll be public hearings in January where the Planning Commission will take additional public testimony, and we'll work through these issues before making a recommendation to council in the February-March timeframe. I think that concludes the presentation for today, and we can take your questions.
And Wayne wanted us to note that if you haven't noticed, the chat is disabled apparently for this meeting, so you just need to raise your hand and ask questions if you have them.
Yeah, Heather.
All right. First, I just want to thank all of you. This has been a long process. So, one, I'm really glad to see the brownfield recommendation in the EOA draft. Thank you for that. I do have some questions for Daniel. You knew it was coming, Daniel, right? Given that you're thinking about the EOA process when you're talking about the rezoning, which I really appreciate, for the North Reach, like thinking about what we're going to do in the North Reach planning will affect the EOA process, which will be approved before that we touch that. I'm wondering, I have two questions for you. So this is the first one. Have you, when you're thinking about the North Reach planning and the EOA, have you also talked to Tom and his team about what's going on with the CEI hub policy changes as you're thinking about the North Reach as well? And then I have another question. So.
That's a good question. I think Tom is probably better suited to answer questions about CEI hub because he's been a lot more intimately involved in those details than I have.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, obviously, it's all coming out of the same shop. For right now, there is not a whole lot a whole lot of impact that the CI hub decision will have on the EOA. And that is mainly because through the CI hub, we're regulating the use, and we're not looking to change the underlying zoning through that project. So the area will still be an industrial district. And that on the other hand, with the EOA, we're not anticipating, projecting, forecasting a lot of growth in those terminals and that type of use. And so the EOA, you know, if we are, as we restrict and constrain the growth of the terminals, the fuel terminals, that is not having an impact. That's not a source of growth that we're looking for industrial jobs. So I don't think that it really has an impact that we need to account for in the EOA itself. We will also, you know, right now with the schedule and everything, the CI hub work will be going to council before the EOA gets to council. So if there are any changes that we don't foresee right now, we'll be able to account for those in the EOA by the time it gets to council.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Can I ask my second question?
Yeah.
So you talked about like planting in the buffer zones, and I'm wondering if and the tree this came up when you were talking about the tree code. So is it possible to, or is it already included, include native plantings in the coding when dealing with the plantings, like making sure that when these plantings are happening and the trees are being planted, that maybe they have to pull from a native plant list, and two, are you thinking about trees or requiring trees that are drought tolerant and will adapt for climate change? And substituting things like, please don't plant ash trees, right? Like common sense stuff.
I think we can definitely take that into consideration as to what types of trees are suitable for industrial sites and whether we can pull trees off the native plant list that are. I don't think that's something that's currently being considered, but it doesn't mean we can't. And I think that that's good feedback, and it should be something that we think about. Certainly, as far as E-zone goes and the river E goes, any plantings that occur within those areas, and oftentimes many are required if you're going to do development that impacts those areas. The trees have to come off of the native plant list. And so certainly emerald ash borer is something that we are looking at incorporating. And I didn't talk about it in this presentation because it wasn't really focused on the environment as much, but certainly within the CCIL, we have some code amendments that are going through. And one of the things that we're proposing to incorporate in the CCIL zoning code amendments is to have allowances for replacement of emerald ash or Oregon ash trees that are impacted by the emerald ash borer with a more suitable species that won't be susceptible to the pests and disease. And so that's part of our project proposal. It wasn't in the discussion draft, but it's something that's very recently become a big hot topic that's on our radar. And so when the proposed draft comes out, we're planning on having some new allowances for removing ash trees and replacing them with something else that would be a suitable tree from the Portland plant list. And the expectation would be it would be native. As far as the drought tolerance and climate change resilient question goes, that's kind of an ongoing thing. I think that we, in the not too distant future, are hoping to do a significant update to the Portland plant list that will really take into account climate change in a way that it has not in the past. But that's something that's kind of outside of the scope of this project right now. But it's something that we on the environmental planning team are taking seriously and want to work on in the near future if possible.
Okay, thanks, Daniel and Tom.
Well, I would also, I think just to follow up on that. So what we would be doing, because right now the tree code outside of the E-zones, which is where the tree code applies, it does not currently apply to the heavy industrial zone. And so basically what we'll be doing is applying the things that, varying degrees, which are part of the scenarios, the things that apply to applied to elsewhere in the city through the tree code. There are allowed plant lists. I can't remember. Just on a private property, there's clearly less control on specifically what to plant there, but you do need to get the urban forestry determines, what's an acceptable tree to be planted and that sort of thing. I don't think they take that into account at the moment. To Daniel's point, we have talked about an update to the plant list at some point that would include something about that and figuring out how to incorporate that. That's probably a much larger undertaking. We are we were already thinking about doing a small update to the Portland plant list, but in terms of the emerald ash borer, because it has been identified in Portland, we are looking at, so the code changes that Daniel's talking about, we will be incorporating from an environmental zone perspective. The addressing ash and how we address it into the Portland plant list is a new addition to sort of this, what we were looking at, sort of relatively targeted small update to the Portland plant list that we kind of work with environmental services to do that. But now we want to have a holistic kind of citywide approach to the emerald ash borer, and the updates to the Portland plant list. We still need to figure out what exactly all of these different changes look like. And like I said, there will be a code for the environmental zones that would address it. That would be part of the CCIL. But holistically, we are also just making sure, across, because right now, obviously, Oregon ash is a native and it would be hard to remove and things like that. So we will be looking at to be honest, right now, I'm not sure what the implications will be on the Portland plant list related to ash, but that will be part of this relatively targeted plant list update that we plan to do this fiscal year.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Micah.
Yeah. On slide 13, you sort of listed out some of the investment strategies. And I'm curious, amongst all of the options, like which are the ones that are most directed at providing benefit to actual workers? And wondering how you all are considering that within the sets of options to help incentivize or create more family wage jobs for more workers, more Portland workers? Or are all the prescriptions just based on like improving the bottom line of those corporate businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what you mean by a direct benefit to workers. As much as I think they work on two levels, right? There are some programs that are, if you're any industrial business, you're eligible, to take advantage of those, like a brownfield cleanup, right? If you have a brownfield site, we want you to clean it up. It'll still be zoned industrial. What gets developed later is, doesn't really matter. I will say Prosper Portland has a whole nother different set of strategies that are more targeted at specific industries, like the metals and manufacturing and food processing and clean tech. And I think that's where we get more into the more specific recruitment of specific types of businesses. And I think those have been selected because they offer more of those, as you're saying, denser family wage jobs. So I think it's a two-level strategy. Like one, we need the building space for those businesses to go into to begin with, and then two, what other incentives can we use to attract specific kinds of businesses? Other questions? All right, we are at time. We will be holding another one of these sessions tomorrow evening. We are available. We will be holding other events that you can find on our events page at the website. As I said, we'll be holding a meeting with environmental groups next Monday night at the Lloyd Center in the Braided River campaign space. We will have our own open house at the Portland building on Thursday of next week. Yeah, Micah.
Yeah, one final question, sorry, is are you only considering the 8 scenarios? Or let's say, would you consider a high natural resource, medium investment, and high community impact scenario? Because that wasn't within the list of 8.
Yeah,
but
they're
could
not.
these be up to.
No, we're looking at the wide range of options, right? Our model is currently running, I think, 21 different scenarios, like those combinations. And even within that, right, the natural resources, right? There's 3 components. We can mix and match those components. So the preferred alternative when we get to the planning commission isn't necessarily locked into one of these, but we're gonna get really fine tuned. So
Okay.
if there are specific comments about specific components of these policy options, we are certainly interested in hearing that.
Okay. Because I think it makes it difficult for a community to sort of so many different options to like and so many like little policy sort of prescriptions under each of those. That's like hundreds of sort of points to make within one comment. But if there are these broader scenarios outside of maybe the eight, like are you hoping for very prescriptive comments like on every single sort of decision option that was availed, or more for the broad?
Oh, I think we are interested in the very detailed comments if you have them on particular issues. Especially when it comes to the CCIL e-zones, right? Because that is a very real decision, right? We will be changing lines on the map through that process with this process. So that is you know, where if anything, we want specific comments on that. The other ones, again, are framing a future discussion about those, and so they can still be a little bit more on the fuzzy end of things, the higher level key concepts, key policy outcomes we're looking for, because the details will be worked out later through these follow-on processes.
And just quickly, as a reminder, we have a separate map app for the CCIL project. These are, we're kind of coordinating these two. So if you have specific comments on the CCIL, please make sure. I think we can speak specifically about how the environmental scenarios apply to EOA and how it's important for these considerations as part of the EOA. But if you have specific recommendations and thoughts on the CCIL scenarios, please put them into the CCIL map app. I'm sorry for the confusion, but these are working together, but they are distinct projects, so we want to make sure that we have documented all of the input throughout the process.
Yeah. All right. Thank you everyone for attending this afternoon. If you have follow-up questions, you know, there's many different avenues to reach out to us, and we appreciate your time today. We'll end it there.
Thank you.
Thanks all.